Hi everyone, and welcome to this video whereby we talk you through the overlying or the overarching corporate strategy and transformation training program that we have running on strategytraining.com. In today's video, I'm going to briefly talk about the big difference between corporate strategy and other forms of strategy. I've mentioned this before, but based on questions I've received, I decided to extract it and bring it out. So the biggest issue here is in a business unit, let's say a pricing strategy study that you do for a client. The client may tell you something like, hey, how can we modify our pricing to raise profitability? So you know that the goal of whatever you're trying to do is to raise profitability. In corporate strategy, you are not given a goal beyond obviously increasing shareholder value in the long term, which is the same as not having a goal in the first place, because that's the goal of every single company. In the absence of a goal, you don't know how to make changes because there's no objective function that you're given. And if you're not given an objective function, you need to develop an objective function. And that makes the study very, very difficult. Because if a company like General Electric comes to you and says, develop our corporate strategy, how do you figure out what General Electric should do in the future? But if General Electric comes to you and says, hey, develop our marketing strategy for locomotives in Germany to raise market share, you know the goal is to raise market share. So the lack of an objective function means that you don't know what it is you are trying to maximize, optimize, or reduce. But there's another issue. Without an objective function, it is really difficult to apply traditional consulting tools like how do you build a decision tree from an objective function? If your objective function is to increase profits, profits equals revenue minus costs. Revenue equals revenue from segment 1, 2, 3. Revenue from segment 1 equals price times volume. Then you prioritize volume and you develop an hypothesis. And then you develop the analysis to test the hypothesis. Then you develop your work plan and storyboards. So you can see in the absence of an objective function, the traditional tools fall down. Now, if you go to strategytraining.com and you look at adjusting the proposal in the corporate strategy and transformation study, we will show you how to analyze and develop the structures for analysis in a corporate strategy study where the objective function is not clear. But that's a very big difference you need to understand, because if you just try to apply the traditional tools, you get stuck, you become undone, you get lost. Because we're so used to optimizing some function that in the absence of that function, a lot of times we will not know what to do. And your goal is really to figure out, okay, if we don't have an objective function, this is usually corporate strategy, but then how do I figure this out? Now, let's assume you're doing a study for a business unit of a larger company and they don't have an objective function. They just hide you and say, develop our strategy. The reason why that's not corporate strategy is because whatever you do for the business unit must enable the corporate strategy. So you can use the corporate strategy as a guide. Do you see that? But for the corporate parent, if they don't have an objective function, there's nothing to use as a guide. And then you have to develop a different way of analyzing the problem. So the point is, don't be scared and don't be worried if you're doing corporate strategy work and you find traditional tools don't really give you the right answers, or you find that you can't figure out what this company needs to do because it's too confusing. There are too many options. There's a way to analyze it and it can be done very simply. But what you need to understand is that in corporate strategy, without an objective function, you have two problems. One, you don't know what you're trying to solve, and two, the traditional tools are probably going to fail you a little. So as always, I hope you enjoyed that. And if you have any questions, please feel free to write in and I'll be more than happy to answer them.